Welcome back to Red Cedar Radar. I am joined today on the podcast by Paul. Again, familiar face. This podcast should be called the Sydney, Paul, and sometimes Brendan podcast, but we'll keep it as Red Cedar Radar for now. Before we jump into women's and men's basketball coverage today, I kind of want to just chit chat for a second, tell everyone where I've been and kind of, what's the schedule for the pod going forward. So I had the opportunity to travel to Maui and cover Michigan State basketball there at the Maui Invitational. And then I was lucky enough to stay a little bit longer in Maui. So I took a little bit of a break from the podcast and a little bit of a break from normal life and spent some time on the island. And I also just recently got a new job, little personal life update. So things have been a little bit crazy with being on vacation and getting a new job, but now things have leveled out a little bit, and the podcast will be back on its regular weekly or maybe bi-weekly schedule. So you'll be seeing and hearing me more again. Hopefully you're excited about that. But sorry for the little break. It was necessary for my, mental health, and getting a new job has been exciting. So just had to take a little break for a while, but we're back better than ever. So how are you, Paul?
I'm doing good. I unfortunately was not in Maui. I did. I thought about it briefly, but life circumstances didn't really allow it this particular year. So hopefully next time MSU is in Maui, I'll try to prioritize getting to that. Although the scary conversation is whether Tom Izzo will still be coached the next time MSU's in Maui, and
I know.
that's all I'm going to say about that because it's too scary to contemplate.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I've just been enjoying the holiday season here in Michigan, and I have 2 fewer wisdom teeth than I did 2 days ago. So other than that, it's been a pretty pedestrian last month or so. All things considered.
Yeah. So if he sounds a little less wise on the podcast tonight, then you know why, everyone.
Yeah, yeah, up to 67% less wise. Yes,
Yeah. Whew. Those are
or
big
75.
numbers.
If I go back far enough. Yeah, still got one though, so
Okay.
it's
Still
holding on.
holding on. Yeah.
Still holding on.
Okay. Let's jump right in. Let's start with women's basketball. So they're currently ranked number 15 after a great win against Iowa at home. They had to claw themselves back throughout the game and really hold on at the end. The end score 68-66. They let Iowa get a little bit too close within those last couple minutes. It made me nervous, but they were able to hold on. I've watched them play a couple times, and they really seem like they work well together. And Julia Arol is a beast. She is averaging about a double-double every game, and being a graduate on the team, and she's been at MSU for a while, obviously. She's a graduate forward guard. I think she plays both. She looks like she is a veteran on the team. She plays like I would hope Jaden Akins would play every game as a veteran on the men's team. Like when she's out on the court, everything seems more calm, and a lot of things run through her, and it's just fun to watch. She's a fun player to watch. Michigan State women's basketball is 10-0 right now. So I read that this hasn't happened very often in Michigan State basketball history. It has only ever happened to 3 other teams. So the men's teams in 1991 and 92, the men's team in 2000 and 2001, and then the 2015-2016 season. Those were all started at 10-0. So pretty big honors, pretty cool stuff happening on the women's basketball side. I've gotten myself a couple tickets to go to a couple games coming up just because I think they're worth supporting, obviously, because they're playing great. So any notes about women's basketball? You said maybe you caught the end of the Iowa game, Paul.
I did. I caught the end of that. I've been trying to carve out some time to watch some of those games, and I did see the tail end of that game finally. And yeah, as you said, they were down much of the game. They staged a pretty furious comeback in the fourth
Yeah.
quarter, if I remember correctly. It looked like they had control, and then they had some trouble at the free throw line in the final
Yeah.
minutes that
Yeah.
could have iced the game away, but instead they kept it more interesting than it perhaps should have been. But
Mhm.
certainly getting a win over Iowa is big. I mean, Iowa's been kind of the flag bearer for the Big Ten. I mean, certainly Caitlin Clark is no longer there, so they're
Right.
not quite the team that they have been, but they're still, considered one of the better Big Ten teams. So that was a great win, and
Yeah.
10-0 is 10-0. I mean, that's hard to do even if you're playing a mid-major schedule, quite honestly. And
Right. Right.
they've definitely had some tough games in there. So
Yeah.
um, hopefully they can keep it going. I think Coach Freilich has done a really great job, and this is her second year.
Hmm.
Um, it's been a women's basketball has been a pretty stable program. I mean, going back 20 years. I mean, it's not like they've been good every year, but they've been usually, they've been a tournament team most of the time, not every year, but
Hmm.
they've been solid. I think Susie Merchant had a good program, but it was also a
Yeah.
good time for her to move on. And the program, much like many of the different sports in East Lansing, are doing quite well. So that's something
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
Spartans should be proud of.
Yeah, women's basketball heads to the West Palm Beach Classic, which sounds lovely right now. Let's all head down to West Palm Beach for a quick little trip. I'm just saying that because I'm used to the warm weather and, this cold stuff in Michigan isn't doing it for me. So a quick trip to West Palm Beach would be great. They first play Montana, who's 4-5, and then they take on number 24 Alabama. So that second game should be a little bit of a better matchup. Obviously, don't want to discount Montana. Don't know much about them, but that second game should be a good game for them on the road. So fun to play in West Palm Beach right before Christmas. I feel like that's kind of awesome. So I will be. I
It's
think their game against Montana is. We're recording Wednesday, December 18th. Their game is tomorrow, the 19th. I think. Did I read like noon, 2 o'clock? Let me look.
I
I
mean,
did
West
just look at
West
this.
Palm Beach is no Maui, but it's not bad. I mean, I guess
Yeah,
it's
12.
acceptable.
So they'll play the Montana Grizzlies tomorrow, probably around the time that this is released. So I do want to say, now that you said that about MSU athletics in general, let me just read off a couple things. Let me read off from a graphic that Spartans Illustrated just posted. I just had it pulled up here. Jacob made it. It's pretty cool if I can find it.
I know which graphic you're referring to, Sydney.
I had just was looking at it. I should have kept it up. Um,
And now we're both scrambling to find it. Also, I will note if anyone's watching on YouTube, my cat Dora has decided to join the podcast today. She's also a big MSU sports fan and also a fan of the cable of my headphones.
yep, yep. You know what? Let me see here. Let me go to our socials. Okay, here we go. Spartans in the top 20. Ice hockey, their record is 13-2-1. Men's tennis is projected to be number 10. Women's gymnastics preseason ranking is 11. Women's basketball is, like I said, ranked number 15 with their 10-0 start. Women's soccer postseason was ranked number 16, and then men's basketball is ranked number 20. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's very good. I mean, it's easy to only focus on the major revenue sports, so
Mm-hmm.
football, men's basketball, you know, ice hockey, and so I think in East Lansing you consider on the level of or similar to the two big sports. And then women's basketball is kind of a up there in that tier as well. But to
Yeah.
have so many of the other sports teams doing well is really great. That's the sign of a strong athletic department, and I think honestly, Alan Haller made a lot of those hires. That
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
he's I don't want to say he's caught fire, but I think people were frustrated over how the football season ended, and they
Yeah.
wanted to blame somebody, and he
Of
was a
course.
target of some of that
Mm-hmm.
criticism, whether it was fair or not, and it
Yeah.
absolutely was not fair. Just to be clear,
Yeah.
um, but I think that he should get a lot of credit for the strength of a lot of those programs.
I just saw recently, I think it was today that I saw that the women's volleyball coach stepped down.
That's yes,
And
that's correct.
she was a hire by Alan Haller, I think. She's not been here very long. Um, but
I
it's
believe
it's
3 seasons.
nice.
I think.
Yeah, not very many seasons. It's nice, and maybe it's not, maybe nice to see isn't the right word for this, but it's nice to see that if someone isn't performing at the level that maybe some of those other sports right now are performing at, that they're able to make changes. Because sometimes I feel like, people get in, it becomes more of like oh, they've been here for so long, we want to keep them around, we hired them in, we want to give them more chances, and like sometimes people aren't cut loose from those positions as much as they should be. So it was nice that to see Alan Haller be able to maybe make a decision like that to try to put some of those other sports heading in the direction that we just kind of talked about. So we'll see what happens with that. And I don't know much about women's volleyball, but I just saw that today. So Alan Haller's out there making changes if things
Yep.
aren't going right. So
Yeah, that's a good
good
point,
to see,
Sydney.
I guess. Yeah. Okay, let's talk men's basketball.
Okay.
Men's basketball is ranked number 20. They had a very recent game against Oakland at Little Caesars Arena. They won 77-58. Let's just talk about that game in general before we get into kind of other nitty gritty stats and stuff. A little bit of slow start from the Spartans in the first half, and then they were able to kind of piece things together in the second half and take a commanding lead. What were some things that you saw during that slow start, and kind of how did you feel about them coming out, like going into halftime?
Well, I mean, honestly, I've seen a lot of MSU Oakland games over the years, and actually, the rivalry has a bit of a fond place in my heart because the first game I ever covered for what is now Spartans Illustrated was a game at LCA with MSU versus Oakland, and the first press conference I ever attended was a Greg Campy a press conference, and he is a national treasure. I really
Yeah,
just
he is.
adore that man as a coach, and so it's tough to you don't want him to lose even to MSU, but then you sort of have to. There's no alternative. But I think his team plays a very tricky zone. And I think that MSU, especially coming after a long layover with finals week, I think they had a lot of trouble kind of cracking that zone. And then I think that just kind of messes with the flow of the game and it can partially translate to defense. And I honestly think also the team had a little bit of trouble figuring out the 3 point line, whether that was the college line or the NBA line, because it seemed like almost every 3 pointer was an NBA three, and they didn't have to be. So I think that might have had something to do with the poor 3 point shooting in the first half, especially as they maybe were a little miscalibrated, or that was certainly not helping. It didn't seem to affect Oakland at all because they were kind of lighting it up from three, at least in parts of the first half, and that did even out by the end of the game. Um, and so I think that the slow start's not so surprising. I think when they played last year, they a very similar flow of the game. It was very tight in the first half, and then in the second half they kind of figured it out. And honestly, I think MSU's depth really wore down the Golden Grizzlies in the second half. And even Campy, I think, admitted that in the post game press conference that they got worn out. And I mean, MSU's deep. They're going to do that to a lot of teams this year. So it's not so surprising. And at the end, they kind of won by roughly what the point spread was. So it kind of all worked out at the end.
Yeah, thinking back to the beginning of the season when there were all of those troubles happening, and Izzo talked a lot about it in multiple press conferences that I was in. He talked a lot about how they found other ways to win,
Mm-hmm.
whether that be bring in other guys or different types of shooting, driving to the basket. And I think the depth that has been shown in these last couple games is because they had to rely on some of those guys that maybe weren't going to come off the bench as soon because shooting was so poorly, and Izzo just needed to try something new. And although watching them miss 3 point after 3 point after 3 point shot was terrible, I do think that working through that adversity set them up well with their depth. And you know maybe this is a glass half full take, but I think it's something that they can use to their advantage for the rest of the season, not just against teams like Oakland. Like you said, that depth will wear out other teams, top teams. I mean, because not a lot of schools have that.
Yeah. I'll even kind of take your optimism one step further, Sydney, because I mean, honestly, the 3 point shooting has been very bad, or
Mm-hmm.
it certainly was at the beginning of the season. I mean, they're talking like bottom five team in Division One, which is over 350 teams. Like that's bad. But what that was actually doing is disguising the fact that everything else was going pretty well. I mean, this team does a lot of things very, very well. I mean, overall, their effective field goal percentage is it's kind of middle of the road, a little bit higher than a little bit above water as far as the median of Division One. But their 2 point shooting has been quite good. It's been I think I was looking at might even be tracking to be the best in the Izzo era, if you could believe that. And so the team is shooting well, other than from three, but that's also turned around in the last 3 or 4 games. The 3 point shooting in the last 3 or 4 games has been very strong. And what has happened? They've annihilated three teams and beat a blue blood in overtime. So, and they should have won that. I mean, they should have won that game going away. You had a front row seat to that. So, and this team is they're a rebounding menace. Like they look like an old school Flintstone rebounding team. I think they're, potentially in the top 10. I think of both off or no, top 20 at least in both offensive and defensive rebounding, um, which is really exciting to see. And then, as far as the other big change is getting to the free throw line. I mean, they're tracking again to be one of the best teams of the Izzo era in drawing fouls, getting to the free throw line, and they're not fouling the other team either, which is kind of unusual. So, those are kind of subtle stats that you don't necessarily appreciate, that you know a, a more casual fan may not appreciate, but they can make a big difference. Um, and now turnovers have been, that's always been a bugaboo for Izzo teams. The last 2 or 3 years, it's been much better than usual. I think last year was the lowest number of turnovers, in the Izzo era. And it's not bad this year, but it's been that's been creeping up. Like it was actually not great in the last couple games, which again, they did everything else so well that it didn't matter. But I mean, overall, statistically, this team looks really pretty good. So, I think the 3-point shooting is hiding the fact that this team could be, even better than we think, quite honestly.
It just feels like they're in sync with each other a lot more than they have been in the last couple years. It just seems like there's
Mhm.
good team chemistry, and I don't know. I think we've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before. Who knows how much that truly matters? But Izzo said something. I think it was. I think it was in Maui. I'm not sure what press conference it was, but he said something like, "These guys want to win, it's not about personal like stats and personal gain. They want to win however possible." Because, oh, yeah, someone asked him a question about how guys were feeling about the rotation, more guys coming in off the bench, maybe getting less playing time because of that, because he was rotating through that depth so much. And his response was, I don't see them having any problem with it because they want to win in whatever way possible. And I think that's a big thing going into kind of Big Ten heavy season, and because people might get hurt, people might be out, and you need to have a team that's, one, ready to step up, and two, like ready to step up for each other and connected in that way. And I just think that makes, one, basketball more exciting to watch when they're connected like that, and two, a team that may outlast some challenges later in the season. I don't know,
Yeah,
but
absolutely. And that was after the Nebraska game, because that was, I
okay.
think you were at that game, right? Because I was
Yeah,
at that game
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
So yeah, we were both in that press conference. Yeah, um, that was the comments that he was making, and it did speak again to that, kind of large rotation. But I mean, 10 guys are playing pretty much every night, and nobody's playing more than 25 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about like Tyson Walker last year was playing about 35 minutes a game,
Right.
and like that's fine. Like you can get away with that, but I think the way Izzo wants to play is a up tempo, faster, get up and down. And again, if you play 10 guys and they're going full tilt and only have to play 25 minutes, you're
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna wear teams out in those. I mean, those last 5 minutes are going to be painful for the other team.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the argument could be made that you want to tighten the rotation down to maybe eight-ish guys, but like who are you going to give less time to? Because
Right.
everybody's contributing and they all have a different skill set that they bring to the
Mm-hmm.
table. Like this is a dangerous team. It really is.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and like I think about how different college basketball is now, and maybe the old standard was you want to tighten it down to those 8 guys, but now with the different makeups of all these teams constantly changing, with players going team to team wherever they're going to go, if you have all those guys that are getting playing time and contributing, why not give them the time if it's working? One, that might retain guys on your team season to season. It might just be a different model for a different time. And I think, we don't have to always follow the old ways, even though Izzo usually does follow the old ways. I've seen him more recently just with the makeup of this team, go to the transfer portal, do things that he was always like, I'm not going to do that, whatever. So, things are changing, and I've been happy with how he's adapted to that this season.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, Izzo loves to complain about stuff,
Hmm.
but he doesn't complain about it. But he's not stubborn. Like he's not as stubborn as people think because he
Yeah.
does change his ways. He does modify coaching style and personality even to the team that he has to try to
Hmm.
get the most out of that roster.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
even his approach to certain guys, you can kind of tell. Like the one example I use is I don't remember him ever yelling at Joey Hauser once. I don't remember ever seeing that. And I think it's because he knew that that wasn't the best way to reach him. But like other players, like Aaron Henry, you thought he was going to
Hmm.
murder the guy on the court a couple times, but that's what he needed.
Yeah.
So like Izzo
Yeah.
is very flexible. He really is. People don't necessarily realize that. He
Yeah.
shows situational leadership. He knows how to, push everybody's button to get the most out of him. That's why he's a Hall of Famer. So
Yeah.
yeah, he'll use the transfer portal. He doesn't like it. He doesn't like NIL, I'm sure, but he'll use it because he has to, and he wants to win. So yeah, that's the way it goes.
Okay, so I thought since you brought up the roster, let's go through the roster. I'll read off guys' names. Let's just give a couple points about each, what we've seen from them in recent games, just to kind of break down, like we said, the depth and just to share kind of feelings about specific players. So, first up, Jackson Kohler. He commands the court when he can hold on to the ball. He had little butterfinger trouble first couple games of the season, but I think that's mostly been fixed the past couple games. Any notes about Kohler?
He's just been a rebounding machine, and he's
Hmm.
been probably the best energy guy on the roster. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah.
you just see him. I think it was in that Nebraska game. Like, if there's a loose ball, he's the first guy on the floor.
Hmm.
He's playing with passion. I mean, you could see the first two, well, especially his freshman year, you could see it because he has some natural post moves. He's a natural scorer.
Hmm.
Um, and then last year, the injury just really, he was just never himself the whole game. And now you see a guy that's got the benefit of 2 years of Izzo coaching under him, and he's a problem for
Yeah,
defenses because he's he's kind of got it figured out, and he was great last night against Oakland. He was one of the three players that really carried the team. So he's
yeah.
been a nice surprise after, again, not playing much last year.
I watched him during Moneyball, and say what you want about Moneyball, everyone's always like, "Oh, you can't read into it too much." He brought the energy every time. He was happy to be there, be playing
Mm-hmm.
basketball. He was commanding the court. He was hitting threes. Like when a guy is doing that in the off season and wanting to be there at those things, that just means that he loves doing what he's doing, and I think that translates over into the season for whatever measure it is. So I was impressed with him in Moneyball, and other than his first couple shaky games of the season, it has really carried over well into his play during this season so far.
Yeah. And I'd say, as far as that 3-point shooting, I think he was a lot more aggressive early in the season. And I
Yeah.
thought that he sort of had the green light or gave himself the green light.
Hmm.
And he's only shooting, I think I just pulled up 23% from three. And so
Yeah.
now I think the light may have gone from green to yellow because the
Yeah.
last
Yeah.
couple games he's gotten the ball at the top of the key. And it's like he thinks about it, but then he
Hmm.
passes it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we'll see how that goes.
Yeah. Okay, next up, Jeremy Fears. So, assisting passes off his butt on the floor. Amazing work. I just feel like him running the court this year is much better than AJ Hogard running the court last year. And there's no comparison, I don't think. Okay,
No,
any notes about Fears?
Fears is, I mean, I think he's playing really well, and he does a lot of just subtle things right. He makes the right pass.
Hmm.
He's under control. He's a calming force. He plays great defense. Um, so I think Izzo talked about this guy like the closest thing to Mateen Cleese he's seen in 20 years, and he doesn't throw that around. And I think
No.
I think we're seeing it. He doesn't always score a lot of points,
Hmm.
but he does the right thing, with the exception of the last maybe 2 minutes of regulation against Carolina, where he had some problems.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yes.
That was not great.
Hmm.
Made a lot of mistakes in a row, but then you reminded that he's still, he's in his second year, but he basically, lost most of last year, so he's
Right,
still a freshman, and he's going to make
right.
mistakes. But I'd rather see a guy make mistakes and get a win than the other way around. So
Yeah.
yeah, he's been great.
Absolutely. Next up is Kurtang on the roster. Obviously, we've seen him sparingly. I do think it's good that he has gotten some time on the court just because you never know what's going to happen later in the season. And he seems like he fits with the guys. Like I've watched him a couple times during warm-ups at different places that I've been, and he looks, for a freshman, he looks like he fits in just fine. I don't have too many notes about him. Anything to share about him?
No, he comes in as a reputation of a shooter. We've seen him, get a couple points here or there. I think he might have hit a
Mhm.
three a couple games back. But I mean, he's a freshman.
Right.
Hopefully, he'll see a little bit more time, and if some of these games get out of hand again. and just sort of build on that. But I mean, they don't. He's probably the 11th guy off the bench right now, or the 11th guy on the roster,
Yeah.
so he can develop. It's okay. Um,
Yeah.
then we'll just see. We'll see who he is next year, probably.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Jaden Akins. Talked about him a little bit earlier. He has been more consistent as of recent games. There was the second game in the Maui Invitational against Memphis that I think he only scored like 2 points. And in the post game presser, not to toot my own horn, but I asked Izzo um, what he thought about what it does to his team when Jaden Akins can't perform at a higher level. Because Izzo had talked about how they kind of had shut down Akins and weren't really letting him get anything out on the court. So I asked him what he thought when Jaden Akins couldn't perform since he is their veteran guy. And Izzo said, like, it's not all on Jaden Akins to constantly be the one performing the best every time, but it does hurt when he's not out there able to do much at all. So anything about Jaden Akins, Paul?
I mean, Jaden. I mean, he's a good player, obviously, and you're right. He's been more consistent the last few games, and so hopefully he's starting to turn the corner.
Mm-hmm.
But I was honestly getting a little frustrated with the Jaden Akins experience early in the season, just
Mm-hmm.
because he was sort of hyped up as being like he was going to be the man on this team, and I don't know if he is or should be, in all honesty. But I mean, like the second half against Oakland, he was great. I think he's been in double figures like for the last 5 games, so that's been good. So hopefully he has turned a corner. I mean, there was a lot of discussion that he wanted to facilitate more, almost have more of the ball in his hand, making decisions. That was kind of the discussion when there was rumors he might try to transfer a couple years back, but I never really saw it. I think he's got to kind of accept that he is who he is, and he's not a. It's not like he's a bad player, but he's the player that he is, and he needs to sort of play that role. So I'm not, I'm encouraged, but I'm a little bit less jumping up and down about Aiken so far. But
Yeah. Yeah.
he's been good the last few weeks.
Okay, Trey Holloman. I think, I mean, he brings a fun energy to the court. Sometimes he brings too much energy too fast and gets ahead of himself, I think. Um, but I thought that he's shown a little bit better decision making this year overall than in the past. And I think that just happens with getting more experience on the court. He had a great game against UNC. Um,
Yes, he did.
and I just think when he comes in off the bench, he brings good energy to kind of that like second rotation. Any notes about Trey?
I've always liked Holloman. I mean, I think
Hmm.
he's that. I think he was a football quarterback, and he just has a little bit of that toughness that the team needs. And I mean, his shooting has not really come around this year so far, but like we saw him do it last year, so I
Hmm.
think we'll see it again. I think as a he fits a really nice role on this team as kind of a backup point guard or two guard, sort of just does what needs to be done.
Yep.
And at times he steps up and he's a scorer, and other times he's more of a passer. He's just a great fit for the overall roster in general. And I think he'll have games where he's one of the top leading scorers, and others maybe he'll put up 4 points, and he plays good defense just like everybody else in the squad. So he's a great member of the team, great member of the rotation. I'm not sure if he should start, but I'm not sure Frankie Fiddler should start either. So
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
worked better with him starting. So I guess we'll go with that and see what happens.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Frankie Fiddler. I've been a little underwhelmed by him
Mm-hmm.
this season. He kind of was advertised as a shooter, I think. Hasn't really been that. Uh, he has a good knack for driving to the basket and drawing fouls. I've been I've been impressed with that, and but other than that, sometimes he just leaves me wanting a little more from him. What are your notes on Fiddler?
Pretty similar to what you just said. A lot of people were expecting him to be the leading scorer of this team. I heard that floated around. He seems like a solid role player. As you mentioned, he's really good at drawing fouls, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
skill that nobody else on the team. I mean, not that no one else has it, but it's just not a trait that we typically see in an ISO coach team. And so to have him do that is actually quite valuable because you do need that. And
Yeah.
he's solid, but he's not spectacular. As you said, he did come in with kind of a reputation as a shooter, and we haven't really seen it, especially from deep. I mean, he's pretty solid in the mid range. He's a great free throw shooter. He gets
Mm-hmm.
there a lot. But yeah, he's shooting less than 20% from three so far this year, which is that would be, speaking from a purely mathematical standpoint, that is what we call bad. So hopefully
Yeah.
that improves.
Yeah.
But I mean, he's a solid role player. I think
Mhm.
that's what we can say so far, and maybe he has a chance to upgrade himself from that. But so far, that's all we can really say.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, Zapala. I've been impressed by him for most of the time. I think honestly, in these last couple of games, he's really kind of come into his space down there. It seemed like he was kind of figuring things out a little bit at first. Um, but a notable player during the Oakland game just commands a lot of space under the basket and rebounding. He's been doing great. So I think he fits into this makeup of this team really well, and he was a pickup that was necessary, and it's something that was missing years prior. So okay, any notes about him? About him?
I've been impressed so far. I mean, again, he doesn't necessarily do a lot that's going to jump out of the stat sheet, but he's a solid rebounder.
Hmm.
He's got some post moves. He's a big body, which is going
Yeah.
to be helpful in Big Ten play because there's a lot of other big bodies.
Hmm.
And MSU's backup center is Carson Cooper, who I'm a little more positive about than a lot of people are, and we'll talk to him about him in a minute. But he's not. He just doesn't have the bulk at the height as the Paula does, and you're going to need that in certain
Yeah.
matchups. So I think he's been a bit of an upgrade over Sissoko, and I mean we
Hmm.
all love Sissoko, but he was had some limitations, and so he's been again he's a solid role player, and I think he's been a solid contributor, and is the reason
Yeah.
he starts. So he'll be a valuable piece of this puzzle going forward, I believe.
I agree. Okay, Jace Richardson. Um, Smooth is the only word that I can think of first. Like, he is just the best freshman I've ever seen join an Izzo team. Um, and I just think, like, coming off the bench is a good place for him because he is so new to kind of this whole level of playing. But I think if needed, he could start. Um, he just really fits in with whatever lineup he's on the court with. I really have no bad things to say about him. So you go ahead, Paul.
I have nothing bad to say about him either. He's incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
as you say, he might. I mean, there's MSU's had a lot of good freshmen, and this I've heard this discussed other places. Jared Jackson or Miles Bridges or
Mm,
Gary Harris, and I mean, I guess you could pull a lot of stats that would prove that they're better than Jace, but man, is he a breath of fresh air.
yeah.
He just comes in with such a mature presence for such a young kid. And
Hmm.
like every time he takes a shot, you think it's going to go in, and he can score from anywhere. And he's a hellacious defender.
Yep.
So like, yeah, he's a problem for opponents. And I think he's just going to keep getting better and better. Um, I don't know how long he's going to be on the team. I mean, I'm terrible at making NBA projections, but man, that kid looks good. I think he's a Big Ten Freshman of the Year contender. He
Hmm.
should be because I would. I don't think I've.
Who
I mean, I
else?
haven't watched a lot of the other teams yet. I don't know what other freshmen there would be that would be better than him, but good luck because
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
he could be at the end of the season the best player on the team. That
Yeah.
wouldn't shock me.
I
He's
agree.
amazing, and yeah, and he's a really mature kid. I had a chance to talk to him in the locker room a bit after the Nebraska game, and yeah, he's a very good head on his shoulders. Yeah, he's an asset.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. Next up, Carson Cooper. He's one that sometimes leaves me wanting a little bit more from him on the court. And like you said, sometimes his size is a little bit of a problem, depending on what other teams have. But you said you were kind of positive on Carson Cooper a couple minutes ago, so you go ahead and share.
I'm rooting for him. I like Carson. I always
Hmm.
have. Maybe it's because he grew up in Jackson and I grew up in Stockbridge, not far from there. So I feel like a little bit of local Ingham County, well, Jackson County / Ingham County pride there.
Yeah.
But the reason I've always been intrigued by him as a prospect is because he was a soccer goalie in high school, which I think
Oh.
is fascinating
Hmm. Hmm.
because that should naturally give you good hands, good footwork, and kind of that goalie mentality, which I think is
Hmm.
very rare and very valuable in sports. So even though he was, kind of came out of nowhere when they picked him up, I'm like, oh, I could see why you take a gamble on this kid.
Hmm. Hmm.
And I think he has shown promise.
Yeah.
He has some, he plays pretty solid defense most of the time. He's got some length. He does have some offensive skills, but it's sometimes there's some games that are a bit of a struggle out there. But he's a backup center, and yeah, he's a junior, so you'd like him to be a little farther along. But I think as a backup center, he's a solid role player, and I think there'll be games where he cycles up a bit and plays well, and hope to see that, and I'm rooting for the kid.
Yeah, I do think, like you said, like he does play pretty solid defense. On defense, I'm often impressed by him, and I like the mask, so I can't discount him too much. Like it's pretty cool look. So gotta give him points for that too.
It's a little fan of the opera nostalgia
Hmm.
there.
I like it. I like it.
Hmm.
Um, Nick Sanders had great bucket last night against Oakland. Had a good smile. Izzo was happy for him, so that's all that matters.
Yeah, you see that number 20 with the name Sanders playing in Detroit, you're like, that's
Hmm.
good. That's really
Yeah.
good. And I think they were trying to get him the ball late in that game.
Oh,
Like
they were
they were
absolutely.
absolutely trying to get him some points. And so that
Hmm.
was cool. And I've had we had a chance to talk to him for some time at one of the MSU media events, not this year, but the season before. And
Hmm.
I had a chance to chat with him for a while, and he's also a really cool kid. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
absolutely root for him.
Yeah.
It was tough to like, what question do I ask him that does not relate to his father? Because that's the obvious
Right.
question,
Oh,
and
I
that's
imagine. Yeah.
the only question you shouldn't ask.
Hmm.
So
Yeah. Right. Right.
yeah, so that was fun.
Okay. Yeah. He does seem like a nice kid. Next
Yeah, he
up,
is.
Xavier Booker. Um, where's he been? Like suddenly he has arrived. Xavier Booker has come to the Breslin, come to the team, and is playing pretty well. Like, um, he just seems more sure of himself out on the court. He just seems like he fits in with the lineups better these last couple games. Career high against Oakland.
Oh,
Good stuff from Booker early in the season, and I can't remember which game it was. I was sitting by Brendan, and he went up to the basket with the ball soft, like 3 times in a row. Maybe you were sitting next to me. I don't, maybe you were there. I don't know.
I'm not
Got the
sure.
ball, got a rebound, went back up, soft, missed, got the ball, went back up, soft. Like, just for as big of a person that he is, he just played so timid. And I haven't seen that as much from him the last couple games. So I'm not sure what happened or what changed, but I've been impressed with him. Any notes on Booker?
Yeah, I mean, I've been. Um, he's grown on me. Like, I think that
Mm-hmm.
he lacks a consistent motor, and that was, I mean, everyone knew that coming in. I mean, they knew he was raw,
Mm-hmm.
very talented, but he doesn't quite, he didn't quite know at the time, especially last year, what it took to play at the Big Ten level.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there was a lot of people complaining about why he wasn't playing, but then when he would come in, he wouldn't play well. So it's like,
Yeah.
well, that's why he's not playing because he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't know what he's doing yet.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he's starting to obviously figure that out, and he's still coming off the bench, which I think is great. And but yet he's put up double figures in the last 4 consecutive games, and maybe he's starting to really figure it out.
Yeah.
Um, Now the problem that MSU might have is he's playing the four right now, so you've got Kohler and Booker. At times both are playing really well. But then the problem is, somebody's backup power forward's got to play against one of those guys. That could be a
Mm-hmm.
problem
Yep.
because
Yep.
those two guys could start for almost anybody in the league. So again, he's got a very valuable role that he can play. There might be some games when, I mean, he might be starting to put up 20 points in a couple of games here soon. I
Yeah.
wouldn't certainly rule that out because he could be the team's best player. I don't think we'll see that this year,
Mm-hmm.
but he's got that potential, and it's just he needs to continue his development and continue to sort of reach that potential. And
Yeah.
he's got it in him, I think, but it's
Yeah.
a slower process than we'd like.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of development, last one, Cohen Carr. I have to say, out of everyone, when he steps up to the line and makes both his free throws, Izzo fist bumps like every time. That like watching him take shots last year versus watching him take shots this year, he's more composed. You can tell that they like started with the basics and practiced and practiced and practiced, and like him taking free throws. Like I'm not worried anymore when he steps up to the line. Obviously, he's so fun to watch with the dunks and, and just how athletic he is, but playing great defense, he will block a shot and then be the first one down the court to get a pass in the air to dunk it. Like he just works so hard on the court, and he, like I said, he's just so fun to watch. But not just because he dunks, now because he's a much more developed player. That makes me even happier to watch him. So, okay, your notes about Cohen.
He's I can't say he's my favorite player on the roster, but Man, to see his development from last year to this year, again, I think that at times last year you could see how, the raw talent was, of course, obvious, and he would have those jaw dropping plays. But for, there'd be large stretches of the game where, much like Xavier Booker, you could tell he just didn't quite know what he was doing. He
Mm-hmm.
hadn't quite
Mm-hmm.
wrapped his head around the
Yep.
system. And this year, he suddenly made maybe the most improvement on the team.
I think
I
so.
mean, his ability to handle the ball and like, it moves around the basket and just the energy that he
Mm-hmm.
brings rebounding.
Yep.
And his motor is on 11 all the time.
Yeah. Well,
And
yeah.
again, he doesn't have to play 30 for 35 minutes. He can go in and play 20, 25 and just
Mm-hmm.
go all out that
Yeah.
entire time.
Yeah.
And yeah, does he have an outside shot? No. But if he develops one, how do you
Mm-hmm.
guard him?
Yeah. You
Like,
can't.
how? You can't. He'll destroy
Mm-hmm.
everyone. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, man, it's just fun to watch him develop, because like he seems like he's a really, really hard worker is the impression I get.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he's just soaking it up, and I think you're just going to see that
Yeah.
steady improvement over time for, however long he's in East Lansing, and you never know these days.
Yeah. Right.
But he's just so much fun. I just really enjoy watching him play basketball
Yeah.
for
Absolutely.
so
Me
many
too.
reasons.
Me too. Any other notes about the roster in general?
I think the pieces fit together really well, and I think this team is better than people realize.
I think so too, Paul. I agree. Okay, to kind of wrap up our episode here, I know that you've been doing a little bit of work, kind of getting some stats around as we head into kind of after winter break, after we head into kind of heavier Big Ten season. Go ahead and give us a rundown on kind of some things that you've figured out as you've been looking at the numbers and kind of going forward for the rest of the season.
Sure. So yeah, as you mentioned, I have kind of a annual tradition where I go through kind of a deep mathematical analysis of the Big Ten schedule and MSU schedule, and I can start to, I run simulations on the season and can start to, pull some interesting numbers that way. And I'm actually preparing. I'm going to be dropping a two-part series that sort of gives the full summary here. I've been trying to find the best time to do it, because like literally the data changes like every day, so it's kind of hard. It's like moving target. And I actually ran the numbers like 1st of December, and it showed that it was like the entire conference looks the same. So it's like, well, that's not so interesting. It's like everyone's going to finish 10-10. It's like, well, no, that's probably not going to happen. But I mean, there is an issue with parity in the Big Ten. I mean, like last year, Purdue was like Purdue, and then everybody else, and everybody kind of knew that, and so that kind of created this kind of skewed view. But I mean, right now, like, there's no like super team, but like the top 7 teams or so in the Big Ten are essentially indistinguishable from each other. So, any one of those teams could potentially, win the Big Ten. And if you're curious which 10 teams those are, it would be UCLA, Michigan, Oregon, Illinois, Maryland, and Purdue, I believe, and of course Michigan State is among that group as well. And so, that's encouraging. I mean, MSU right now, I think in Ken Palm is maybe the second or third highest ranked team, and Ken Palm is not the end all be all, but it is, does correlate well with point spreads, which is important because point spreads correlate well with actual game results. Um, so that's encouraging. There is also, I think there was a big question about how the expanded Big Ten and the different way the schedule is put together might impact things. Because right now, with so many teams, there's only 3 teams that MSU plays twice. So MSU will play Michigan twice, they'll play Illinois twice, and they play Minnesota twice. And that's of course the same with all Big Ten teams. But the weird thing is the differences in the schedule difficulties is really pretty insignificant. It's actually more parity this year than last year. The difference between the hardest schedule and the easiest comes out to only about 1 game advantage out of 20, which is less than last year. So that was kind of surprising for me. And MSU's schedule is very middle of the road. It's like kind of, dead average. So there's no real strong advantage or disadvantage there. But the interesting thing is the West Coast teams, a couple of them have a bigger schedule advantage, because UCLA and Oregon are both pretty good, and Washington and USC are both pretty bad. And so what happens is that because they want to try to minimize travel, so those 4 West Coast teams, the 3 teams they play twice are the other 3 West Coast teams. So if you're a team like UCLA, you play Washington and USC twice. Those are like two of the worst three teams in the conference. So voila, you have the easiest schedule in the conference. So at this point, UCLA is kind of the de facto favorite, both because they're pretty good and because they have one of the easiest schedules. So that's one little tidbit that I've extracted from this. Um, one of the others is that Penn State also has kind of a surprisingly easy schedule, and they've kind of been a little better than expected. So they're a little bit of an interesting dark horse team to kind of watch for. So it's kind of an overview. That's kind of where it is. But I mean, right now, I actually calculate MSU's odds to win the Big Ten about 18%, which is pretty solid. And UCLA, as I said, is the current favorite, at least according to the math. Their odds are only 28%. So that's a pretty big step up. But there's again 7 teams with over a 10% chance. So they're kind of right there. Now, the other thing which might be more difficult for our listeners to hear is Michigan actually is right now in second place in my odds, a slightly better odds than MSU, 19%. And that's partially because they're one of the only 3 teams in the Big Ten actually made it through that December Big Ten schedule 2-0. Michigan and Michigan State were 2 of those 3 teams. With the other one, I think, also being UCLA. So those 3 teams have a little bit of an advantage. Michigan, one of their wins was at Wisconsin, which is a harder game than Michigan State has played so far, because MSU had a pretty good draw in December, and it was important to get those wins, because the other thing about MSU's schedule is it's very backloaded. So people have talked about can MSU get to win the first 8 Big Ten games or something. And the answer is yes, but the other part of that answer is they kind of need to because it gets pretty rough after that. They've got a big game coming up at Ohio State after the new year. That was looking tougher a few weeks ago. It is now looking easier. um,
Poor Ohio State is all I have to
yeah,
say. I've seen some. I've never watched out of solidarity of never watching them, but I cannot imagine those final scores. Like they've hurt me to just look at a little bit. So sorry
you
for them.
know, they're an interesting team. I haven't followed them closely, but they had that really rough season where they had Chris Holtzman was the coach, and then they fired him, or I forget exactly how he left, but he left with 2 weeks left in the season, and then they got under the interim coach they got way better, and they started playing really well, and then they hired that guy Diebler, I think is his name, former Ohio State player, and everybody was kind of surprised, and so now you kind of wonder if maybe that was the right choice. So we'll see how it turns out. But yeah, they're kind of sinking. But yeah, if MSU can get that win at Ohio State, then honestly, yeah, the chance of going 10-0 to start the Big Ten is not far fetched. I mean, they'll probably lose one there somewhere, because it is hard to win 10 games in a row. I mean, it sort of doesn't matter who you're playing. Winning 10 in a row is,
Except the women's basketball
except the women's
team.
basketball team. That's true. But yeah, I mean, MSU will be favored in every other game in that first half of the season, except at Ohio State. And now that's actually looking like more of a toss up. But things start getting interesting, right, as the calendar turns to February. Because that's when MSU takes the sort of road. They have the one road trip in the middle of the season out west, and they draw the 2 West Coast teams that they draw on the road are USC, who again is bad, and UCLA, who is good. And so they'd be expected to beat USC, but that game at UCLA is projected to be pretty tough. So that could be the toughest game on the schedule, and so they're likely to lose that. But then after that, it gets pretty brutal. They they got Oregon and Indiana after that at home. Oregon is again, they're pretty good. Indiana was supposed to be good. They're not actually good. But then the real gauntlet comes in the last 2 weeks of February. So February 15th till the end of the month, MSU goes at Illinois, plays Purdue at home, at Michigan, at Maryland. That's really where the Big Ten, I mean, if MSU is a Big Ten contender, which I think they are, that's where it's going to be won or lost. I think they probably have to split those 4 games. If they do better than that, then I think things will be looking very good. But that's probably where the season's really going to come down to those 4 games. Now the schedule gets a little easier after that. The last 4 games are pretty winnable. But yeah, that back end of the schedule is tough. So yeah, they're going to need people are going to maybe be excited in January because things are going to be looking really good, but it's because we're playing the softer part of the schedule. If it's not looking so good, then it's not going to then it's trouble. I mean the advantage is that there's opportunity at the back end of the schedule, but you know it could be rough. Um, but the other thing is, as far as the record that's most likely going to be required to win the Big Ten, I think I heard somebody, I think it was our friend Matt Sheehan, say that he thought 13-7 might win the Big Ten. That's not likely. That's not what the math tells me. Actually, the most likely record for the Big Ten champ is 16-4, because basically there's going to be one or two teams that are going to overachieve enough that they're going to win more toss-ups than they lose, and that it's actually mathematically you can call that luck. A lot of people do, including me. It is a little bit luck. It's also what good teams do. Good teams win close games. So there's going to be a team that's going to cycle up and they're going to win more of those games than they lose. They're probably going to get closer to that 15 or 16 win mark, and that team's going to hang a banner. So will that team be Michigan State? They've got as good a shot as almost anybody.
Yes.
So let's say UCLA is probably the biggest concern just because they are pretty good and they've got an easy schedule. And that might mean a difference of a game, and a game might be all it'll take.
Okay. Okay. I have to say, and I maybe said this every year that I could speak and that I knew about basketball, but feel pretty good. Feel pretty good about this team right
I
now.
do.
Um, this feels a little different than what we've seen the past couple years. So who
Yeah,
knows? Who
it
knows?
does. It has a positive vibe.
Yeah.
Um, just a couple other minor schedule comments. The expected number of wins is 13. So if MSU, if they are that gritty / lucky team that wins more than they lose, then, you're seeing 14, 15 wins or 16. They're actually going to be favored in all but 5 Big Tens as things stand now. So that would be 15-5 if they win all the games they're supposed to and lose the ones that they're underdogs. So we'll see what actually happens. But yeah, that's kind of what the math says. 45% chance to get a top 4 finish in a double bye as things stand today on December 18th, 2024.
Okay. Okay.
These
Heard it
numbers may
here
change.
first, everybody. We'll come back here when it comes to be that time. We'll see.
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to add before we wrap up our episode?
Um, I don't think so. I think we covered pretty much everything.
Yeah, I think this was a good rundown. After MSU's break, heading into their match against Florida Atlantic on Saturday, I will be there. Paul, will you be there?
I will be there.
We'll be
Yes,
there together. Oh
we
my gosh, what a
will. It's so
treat.
exciting in person.
Yeah, amazing. So we will be there covering the game with Spartans Illustrated. Speaking of Spartans Illustrated, check them out, especially during this holiday season if you're looking to get a gift for someone. Consider getting them a subscription. I think it's a great gift. I think your family members would love it. So that information will be linked down in the description of the episode. Subscribe to Red Cedar Radar wherever you listen to podcasts, and find Paul and I on YouTube if you want to see our beautiful shining faces during this podcast. Anything
And
else you want
also,
to add?
you can also potentially see my cat's tail or part
Yes.
of her body in the YouTube
Yes.
feed if that
Oh,
shows up.
what a
She made a
treat.
little cameo. And I will, as far as the Spartans Illustrated gift, just remember at least 2 of Santa's favorite 3 colors are green and white.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That warms my heart.
It's a very, seasonal. Try to bring some
Yeah,
seasonal
yeah.
content.
Yeah, we should say
Uh,
happy holidays.
Happy
And
holidays. Yeah.
we will be seeing Paul and I again after the Florida Atlantic game. We'll do our kind of recap episode. So that'll be going out on Saturday. If I can convince Paul to stay around after the
Of
game. I haven't
course.
told him. I haven't talked to him about
I
that
was going to
yet.
say,
But
this is news to me, but I'm
yeah.
already excited.
Thanks so much for listening. And like I said, I'll be back on a more regular schedule with posting on Red Cedar Radar here again soon. So thanks so much. Bye.
All right. Thanks, everybody.